Don't worry, we are friends.
GM friends, and welcome back to another episode on the Frens Validator channel. If this is your first video, I'm your host Juri Maibaum, and this show is the hub that brings together crypto pioneers, exciting projects, and a thriving community. We at Frens Validator are a core contributor to the staking sector and believe that it will grow into a multi-billion-dollar industry over the next couple of years. On the show, you will learn how to profit from the proof of stake run-up, how to make passive income in crypto staking, and how to stay ahead of the curve. If this sounds interesting to you and you want to profit from the staking revolution, subscribe to this podcast show. And today, I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome back a returning guest, actually, who has been at the forefront of chain abstraction, Ethan, aka Tobasco from Particle Network. Good to have you back, sir.
Good morning. It's been a while. I think it's been maybe 6 months since the last episode or something like that.
Yes, that's true. And so much has happened since then, no?
A lot has happened. The whole chain abstraction vertical and our product. And I mean, I would assume if you go back and you listen to that episode, I would hope that a lot of the predictions and the things that we discussed and that would happen now, I think a lot of it would be true. But maybe I'll have to go back and listen to it because I don't know actually how much of it would be true. But good things have happened. There's been immense amount of growth. And, I think during that episode, that was kind of the peak of the chain abstraction narrative hype. And things died down a little bit as we went into Q4 and people consolidated and started building products. And because like all these narratives, they go through their phases of they have this like parabolic like hype, oh, this is going to be so great, whatever, people talking about it, and then you need some time to actually build out products, and so then it kind of fades down a little bit and less hype. And so that was kind of Q4, and now we're starting to see it pick back up again in Q1 as people start to ship products, as we shipped products pretty recently. We're seeing more chain abstraction protocols actually launch their infrastructure. And so I did this tweet. I was like, I think chain abstraction is one of the few major narratives from the past year that actually made it out of the hype phase. Because a lot of these narratives, they get stuck in that hype phase where they never really cross the barrier into something that has tangible impact to user experience or has tangible, creates real products as a result. A lot of it just kind of dies out and as theory or as things that people think might be good for apps one day. So it's rare to see a narrative that actually breaks through that chasm and into making real impact to real applications. Chain abstraction is one of those few narratives that has already done that. And, it's only been around for a little bit over a year at this point in terms of, mainstream mindshare. And so we'll talk about it, but it's, it's been amazing to see. And I think, we, about a year ago, we bet everything at Particle on chain abstraction. I mean, we were a successful account abstraction brand. We did a lot of stuff there. We basically dropped everything and we said, we're going all in on chain abstraction. And so far that bet has been very good, but yeah, it's been kind of a wild 6 months.
Yeah, totally. And we are also going to delve deeper into this. And actually, also abstraction is one of my, I hate to call these things narratives because it always sounds so short term, but let's call it topics or sectors within crypto, I would say. And abstraction is actually one of my favorite ones because it feels like at least someone is trying to, onboard users or provide the infrastructure so that it's possible to onboard more users. And yeah, I think we have enough infra products that just focus on improving the infrastructure. So it's, I would say, a very refreshing wind. But again, Ethan, it's an absolute pleasure to have you back. And you mentioned it in our previous chat. We delved into Particle Network's vision for abstracting the entire crypto industry. We also covered universal accounts back then. And we also talked about, because back then everyone was talking about modularity, how Particle is powering or the entire modular ecosystem is powering chain abstraction. And today we are going to take, I would say, closer look at the upcoming mainnet launch. So trying to get some updates out of you. And then we are going to dive deeper into Universal X, which also launched a couple of weeks ago. And we are going to, try to get some insights on what success looks like for Particle Network in 2025. So there's a lot to uncover here. But for all of the people who may be new to particle network, can you briefly break down what particle network is all about? So you mentioned abstraction already. So can you talk a little bit more on a high level, like infrastructure wise? Are you a standalone blockchain and so on and so forth, and what you are basically trying to solve here?
Yeah, 100%. So the kind of core narrative that we center ourselves around, or kind of the core sector that we participate in, is chain abstraction. So Particle is at its core a chain abstraction infrastructure provider. That's kind of like the product that we have. And so the way that we provide chain abstraction infrastructure more specifically is through something called universal accounts. So universal accounts are just simply like a single account across every chain that you can use with one balance. And so my USDC on Arbitrum is the same as my USDC on Base and on Solana. It's all spendable as if it were the same balance. And so basically, Web3 turns into an ecosystem that feels like one chain everywhere. But of course, like you actually have fragmented balances, but a universal account feels like it's a single unified balance. And so, if I have 5 USDC on Base and 5 USDC on Arbitrum and 5 on Avalanche, and I actually have 15 that I can go and use wherever I want. I can go buy an NFT on Solana for 15 USDC, and it works perfectly. And so this is the idea of universal accounts. It's the ability to go and transact anywhere with a balance that you can have on any chain without bridging. So it's effectively the removal of the need to manually bridge funds across chains and to cognitively manage what chains you're interacting with every single day. You can effectively remove like distinct chains from your immediate awareness whenever you're transacting on chain, and just change things specific to like exclusively, I want to go to an app and I want to do something on this app, and the chains involved and where I have my assets are totally irrelevant. You just do it. You just do whatever you want to do. So this is kind of the idea with universal accounts. Without getting too in the weeds, the way that we power all this and the way this actually works under the hood is that, first of all, we do basically automatic bridging. And so you're still bridging, but it's just you aren't doing it yourself. And so, if I have 5 USDC on Base and I want to do a transaction on Polygon worth 5 USDC, then okay, we just bridge for you in that transaction that you're doing on Polygon. And we'll just move those funds over. And so the way that we do that bridging is through an intent-based system. That intent-based system is coordinated with an L1 that we have, or we don't use. So we call it an L1, but we don't use that term in marketing anymore. We just call it the particle chain. It's basically just a sovereign, independent. It is an L1 that has its own validator set that is used exclusively to coordinate and settle cross-chain transactions that are then used to move funds across chains automatically within these accounts that exist across these other chains. So a lot of words there. It's just basically, we have a means of coordination that we build. We have these universal accounts, which are just smart accounts essentially on these different chains. And the end experience of all this is that your balance in one place is the same as your balance elsewhere, and your balance represents your collective ownership of assets across every chain, such that you don't have to bridge. So you can imagine, the experience that you have on Solana, right? Like the USDC that I have on Solana is the same across every application on Solana. It's one chain, right? But now if you apply that same UX to the entire ecosystem, so as if Base and Berachain and Monad and all these other chains were a part of Solana, even though they aren't, but it's that type of experience, right? It's just it feels like it's all unified. And so that's effectively what we're doing with universal accounts. And as you mentioned, we also build a product called Universal X. And so Universal X is kind of like our consumer facing product that we built using universal accounts. And we can get further into that, but we essentially have 2 business sectors. We have universal accounts, which are a developer facing product. You can build wallets with it, applications, whatever you want to do, anything that you want to have that property of unification. And then we also have the consumer facing side, which we build called Universal X.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, and we are also going to talk a little bit about the economic model behind that in a bit. But you mentioned a couple of ecosystems already that you collaborated with. So, I mean, the vision that you guys have is very clear to a lot of people. And I mean, I'm a classic crypto user from 2019, 2020, and I remember how horrible the UX was when trying to get my USDC from XDAI. I don't know if the chain still exists. It was a sidechain. I think sidechains aren't even a thing anymore, but it was horrible. It was horrible. Or getting money from Ethereum to the newly launched FMOS. It took hours. All of these times are over. So can you talk a little bit about how you view the sector, or like how you view the crypto industry maturing in that aspect? And then you mentioned again all of these other chains you collaborated with, how basically these collaboration had you to gain more traction, and what the, I would say, the sentiment along your partners is about your upcoming mainnet launch.
Yeah, these are both good questions. So the first thing is like kind of what direction is the industry going in? I think that we've made a lot of progress with user experience, but to be honest, user experience is still pretty terrible, especially when it comes to moving funds across chains. Because there's two parts to this. The first thing is just purely due to the fact that we require users to cognitively be aware of and manage their distinct balances on every chain that they interact with. Now, if all we had was Solana and Ethereum, then fine, who cares if they need to manage their Ethereum balance and their Solana balance? But especially if you believe that like we're going to continue scaling into more and more chains, there's going to be more kind of like equally distributed mindshare among chains. And there's a lot of these new chains that are popping up that are going to be gaining a lot of that user mindshare. I mentioned a few of them, Barachain, Monad, Mega ETH. You have all of like the modular app chains that are getting ready to launch. So if you have an ecosystem of thousands of chains, you're going to expect a user to go and manage 1,000 different balances or X number of balances for every application that they use. This is ridiculous. And so this alone is way too high of an ask for most users, especially normies. But the other thing is that even just the pure experience of moving things across chains is such a massive pain in the ass. I didn't even realize. So I've been using chain abstracted apps for so long that I kind of forgot how annoying it was to bridge and to do these things across chains. Last night, I recorded a video where I was comparing. I had one goal, which was I had funds on, I had USDC on Base and USDC on Arbitrum, and I wanted to buy the Trump token on Solana. Okay, how do I do that? So I recorded one part on Universal X. It took me 2 seconds. I recorded another part where I went through like the normal mechanism, which is that, okay, I bridge USDC from Base over to Solana. I bridge USDC from Arbitrum over to Solana. Then I buy the token. It took me like, I don't know, 10 minutes to do that or something like that. I had to go find a good bridge. I had to go do different, like 5 different signatures to get those funds over. Now I go over to Jupiter. Okay, now I have to refresh the page because my balance is updated. Okay, now it's updated. Now I throw it in. I lost like $6 in the process. So I don't know what happened throughout all of that stuff with all the fees. I don't know where that money went. And then finally I had my token. Whereas the alternative is that, listen, the user has enough funds to pay for this transaction. They just don't have it on the chain in question. So just let them pay for the transaction. And that's what chain abstraction is essentially. So the user can just say, I want to buy Trump token and just buy it. And it's one click as if they already had funds there. They don't need to do all this bridging and lose all these, you lose a bunch of money and fees. And, you switch from MetaMask over to Phantom and these different wallets. They can just go and buy the token in one click. And so that's totally possible. And that's kind of what we're building. And I think that's generally how things are going to look, especially by the end of this year. So my prediction last year was that by, Q4 2025, 70% or more of all applications and most wallets are going to be chain abstracted. And I still believe this. I think that we are very close to like everybody realizing, and I think we've already seen a little bit of this with Universal X, like everybody realizing like, oh shit, like this is a much better experience than everything that we have right now. And like, we need to adapt to this. And I think we're going to see a lot of applications start moving in the direction of, you go there, you connect whatever wallet that you want. It automatically detects the balances that you have across every chain, and you can use those. And the great thing for application developers is that you can imagine if I'm deploying an application that has this type of property, I can deploy that application wherever the hell I want. I can deploy it on Solana, or I can deploy it on my app chain. I can deploy it on a Cosmos chain. It doesn't matter, wherever I want to. Because right now, a big part of it, when I'm thinking about where do I deploy my application, a big part of that decision is where are the users? Where's the liquidity? But if users can connect to my application and automatically use balances that they have anywhere else, that doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't matter if I deploy on Solana for the Solana users, because they can use my application anyways. And so now developers are much more free to go and deploy wherever they want. Users can access the entire ecosystem far easier. Wallets can gain more mindshare because they don't have to find some moat somewhere and be some niche, like Cosmos wallet or something. They can service the entire industry far easier. And so there's a lot of value accrual to be done with chain abstraction. But this leads into the second question you asked, which is like, how did the chains react to this? Like, how are some of our partners helping? And I'll tell you, it's mixed, the chains. And so a lot of chains are very anti-chain abstraction, surprisingly. A lot of chains do not want chain abstraction. And so, we've had a lot of partners, and especially the smaller chains and kind of, some of the newer chains, they love it because it's exactly like I mentioned, which is that for some of these chains that don't already have like well-established brands or user moats, chain abstraction is fantastic because now they can attract developers purely off of the basis of their like developer experience and not off of the fact they don't have enough users. And so for these guys, it's a great growth tool. Solana loves it because Solana has all the mindshare right now. And so chain abstraction just gives them more liquidity, to be honest, because more people go into Solana. And so but there's a few chains that we've seen that do not like chain abstraction. Particularly, there's some, it's mostly the chains that have a strong brand and that their brand is their moat. These guys don't like chain abstraction because chain abstraction is an abstraction. I mean, it's the removal of the need to be aware of the chains that you're using to some degree. And so if a user is not aware that they're using a certain chain, then how do you retain your brand as a chain if users don't care anymore? If it's all the same to the user, then how do you stand out to end users? And in my opinion, you shouldn't. The whole premise of chains branding themselves to users, I think, is ridiculous. It's like AWS trying to brand themselves to users and saying, hey, please use apps built on AWS. Like, this is just not what they do. They market to developers, not users. And so I think that's how things are going to go. But we've seen a big mixed sentiment from our chain partners. Like, some of them love it, some of them don't like it. And it all depends on if chain abstraction is a threat to their brand or not. But yeah, that's the way that we've seen the ecosystem at the moment.
Follow-up question to that, because I mean, obviously what you said in my view is completely true, because nobody cares which chain he or she wants to use. I think really nobody cares. Like, the example you mentioned was perfectly clear, was I want to buy Trump coins and I don't want to figure out a way to do that. Nobody wants to do that. I mean, very similar to international bank transfers happen today. If I do an international bank transfer, I really don't care how my bank in Germany is handling that in order to send money, I don't know, to the US. But what about actually the developers, like developer marketing? Because right now you have like a lot of ecosystems that promote how much TVL they have, that promote how strong, you mentioned it, their brand is. They can promote, various different things. So a lot of these chains have the pressure also obviously from their investors to attract a lot of talent, so that they can actually build applications on top of it, so that actually someone is using their chain, generating fees, generating a sustainable ecosystem, yada, yada, yada. So how do you view this from that perspective? Will the conversations that all of these ecosystem leads and DevRel people have, will they change quite a bit when they talk to developers, when we end up living in a world that you just described?
I think that they will. I think that, like, we can go back to the analogy of like AWS. So why doesn't AWS brand to users? Like, why don't they market to users? Why don't you hear about, hey, are you using an AWS app or are you using a GCP app? Like, what are you talking about? I'm just using an app. I don't care if it's built on AWS or GCP. So this is how chains are going to be to end users, in my opinion. And so to developers, it's hard for chains to market like, hey, we have this number of active users. I mean, I guess they could if they wanted to, but developers don't necessarily care about that, because the only thing that matters to them is the developer experience and the technical capabilities of the chain that they're deploying on. And so what matters most in terms of like the actual experience of what they're building and whether or not they can attract users is the quality of their application. And so we shift from like a popularity contest between chains to, how good is your chain? Can you attract developers solely off of the basis of your technical capabilities? If you can, then you win. So the way that you win as a chain is no longer how much can you airdrop to get nice user numbers, but it's how well can you deliver on your promises to be like, a strong chain technically. And why would developers want to use your chain over another chain? And so it becomes a much more competitive environment purely off of the basis of how do you optimize for better developer environments. And this is a huge thing in my opinion. This is really important because in the current environment, the fact that chains are trying to compete with each other for users means they aren't necessarily prioritizing, at least not 100%. They aren't always prioritizing developer experience and building a developer environment. And so if all of a sudden they're forced to compete based on this, and the only way that they can gain value and gain fees and gain applications is through a better developer environment, and just whoever can attract developers because they have the best technical capabilities, because they have the best, DevRels, the best kind of support, whoever can build a type of ecosystem, they win. Now everybody needs to focus on this, and all of a sudden we get better applications because now developers can go somewhere, they can go wherever they want. They go to a place that best suits their application. That place is heavily incentivized to have strong technical capabilities, to have strong developer experience, to promote applications. And so we have this ecosystem that is all of a sudden highly app-centric. Everybody wants apps. Everybody wants to promote apps because that's how they gain their revenue, these chains. Chains are like one of the biggest, they are the biggest kind of entities in the space right now in terms of like total value, like who gains revenue. And so these guys kind of dictate like where do we go as an ecosystem, as an industry. And so if all of a sudden they need to focus on apps, and they will, and I think that's sort of the transition that we need collectively to see, kind of like a more consumer ready industry. And so it sounds small, just like, oh, users don't need to think about the chain. But that's a domino effect, leads into, okay, now chains can't market to users necessarily. So now they need to market to developers. How do they do that? Well, they have better developer experience. They need to optimize for their technical superiority over other chains. This now leads into a dogfight for how do you attract the most applications? How do you be as app-centric as possible? How do you incentivize developers? And so this ultimately leads into a much stronger ecosystem. And like I said, some chains don't want this because that's a tough reality. It's like, oh shit, my chain is not actually that technically capable. So how am I going to compete in that environment? That's a question a lot of these chains have asked themselves. And so I think the reality is that chains that the chains that have a true technical moat, they will survive, and the chains that have only survived up to this point based on hype and don't have a real attraction for developers, I think they are going to find it really difficult to compete in this market. And I think the other thing that's going to make this harder for some of these chains is that a lot of developers, in my opinion, are going to move to modular app chains, because now, like, what's stopping you from launching an app chain? Right now and today, the thing that's stopping you is the fact that I need to somehow get users over to my app chain and get users in liquidity over here. So that's kind of a pain in the ass, and that's like a difficult thing to do because now there's an overhead to get to my chain. But if that's eliminated, then why not build on an app chain? And so now you need to even further optimize for that. And how do you get developers away from that? And so I think it's going to shake out some chains. It's going to change the whole dynamic of what you need to prioritize. It's going to bring new chains in the picture, new winners, change the whole ecosystem dynamic. And I think it's going to cause some pretty heavy changes in Web3. But I'm confident. I think it's what we need at the moment, to be honest.
Yes, and I think that there's so many interesting things that we could talk about and philosophize about the upcoming years in the industry. And because you mentioned it's essentially what we want at the end of the day, but a lot of chains are in a very nice position where they are like VC-backed and have like enough dry powder to survive over the next years and want to have like their ecosystem thrive. But as soon as it doesn't really matter anymore in which ecosystem you are, and you're not like one of the big guys like Solana, it tends to become very difficult. And also, I really love the analogy of the app chains, which is like something that I wanted to touch base on again, which is, I mean, in our previous episode, we talked a lot about the numbers of chains. You said we will have like, I think, hundreds of blockchains or whatever. And I ask you the question whether that will be actually necessary, because we live in a world right now where we see chains launching with like 10 validators or 15 validators, where, my Ethereum mind thinks, okay, then just build a protocol somewhere. So question again, with that in mind, do we need that many chains at the end of the day? Because also running a chain is expensive because you need to either pay miners or you need to pay validators.
Yeah, I don't know if we necessarily need that many chains. I do think that having a distributed ecosystem of app chains, or just like having hundreds of chains, is much more scalable than one state machine, than one single chain. And I've said this before, I love Solana, but it's clear that and they've handled. I know that they failed over the last weekend, and there's a lot of issues, but for being one single chain, they handle that all of that inbound really well. But still, I think if you have an ecosystem of thousands of chains where each app is on a different chain, then you never run into this. There's no overload because everything is its own independent environment. And I think that having these app chains is less about do we need it, and actually more about incentives. Because if you have chain abstraction and there's no downside, you don't lose users by launching an app chain, then eventually there comes to a point where an app scales enough on like a rollup or like a generalized L2 or L1 to the point where they have to ask themselves a question of, listen, we're pulling in 7-figure revenue, and we have to make a decision now. Do we want to continue like giving away all of our fees and like all of our MEV to this chain, or do we want to launch our own chain and gain all of that extra revenue, right? And just pay for the cost of maintenance on that chain, which we can afford now because we have all this immediate revenue, and so we would just make money from this. And so a lot of these chains are going to ask themselves that question, and I think a lot of them are going to come to the answer of like, yeah, it's going to be more profitable for us to own the stack here and to own the chain ourselves that we have our application deployed on, rather than like give all this revenue to this this kind of L2 that we're deployed on. And so I think this is going to be, I think there's only a small group of applications that will scale enough to get to the point where an app chain really makes sense to them from a revenue perspective. But I think that there will be a handful of them that will result in this pretty large ecosystem of app chains plus all of the L2s that are launching. And so I think generally what we're going to see is we're going to see all of the smaller scale plus maybe some larger scale ones on those generalized chains, and then we're going to see a lot of those app chains for the applications that have scaled and have realized that they can make more revenue if they exist on their own chain. And so I think that is what we're going to see, just purely based off of incentives. And this is, of course, another bull case for chain abstraction, because it's kind of like a cycle here. It's like, okay, well, if you can chain abstract things and people can launch app chains, which is kind of better for the ecosystem. And then as more app chains launch, chain abstraction becomes even more important to get right. And so I think it's going to be really important moving forward.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me a lot. I think we have seen something very similar already with the launch of DYDX as its own app chain. I think that's like a very good example of what we have seen already and what we could potentially see even more. But let's talk once again about particle network more in depth. One of the things I'm also very curious about here is, once again, the economic model. I mean, what you guys do is like very beneficial for the entire crypto industry. But yeah, in order to be a sustainable ecosystem, you also need to generate fees. So would love to learn a little bit more about how the economics in particle network works.
Yeah, so there's kind of like two parts of this. The first part is where we're expecting right now a lot of our revenue is going to come from, which is Universal X. So to take a step back, Universal X is basically our kind of like jumper, sort of. So like, if you're familiar with how LeFi built Jumper, or Layer 0 built Stargate, or Farcaster built Workcast, like, these infrastructure providers built their own applications on their infrastructure to prove the value of their infrastructure and to build something themselves. This is exactly what Universal X is to Particle. It is our own application. We built it ourselves in-house. It uses universal accounts. It's all on mainnet. And Universal X is essentially a trading app. It's like a full trading interface. It's really sick, that the whole user experience of it. You go in there, you sign up with Google, or you connect your wallet, buy and sell any token on any chain, one click, full unified balances. It all works really well. I'd recommend trying it out. We just launched a big update this week. That application right now, we're charging 1% for every transaction, and fees to use it. And so that's going to be a big source of revenue for us. It's already started to be a good source of revenue for us. Then for universal accounts, it's going to be like that, the infrastructure itself. We're expecting that we're going to have mostly LP fees. So liquidity providers, which right now is mostly us, are going to get fees, like kickback from every transaction they process across chains. We will launch a token, of course, that will be used for our chain itself. That will go to validators. That token will accrue value through usage through the chain. Whenever you do a transaction, that token will be consumed, and so that will continue to, over time, use a token more. The token is going to be a very integral part of that, and so a big part of our revenue will be through launching a token and having constant utilization of that token, constant consumption. Plus, of course, the core revenue from Universal X is the application that we're building. Now, we aren't like charging anything for universal accounts. It's going to be a totally open infrastructure. Like a lot of it's open source. The chain itself is permissionless. Anybody can go and do whatever they want on it. It's not like the chain, to clarify, is not like something that you go and connect to and use an application on. It's purely backend infrastructure. So like the most important thing with our chain is a validator set, basically, that is like settling transactions. And so that's what our chain is meant for. Essentially, it's just a validator set to some degree. And so it's really important, though, in that
coordination layer, right?
Yeah, so the validator set is essentially the coordination layer that is then actually settling those transactions and then allowing us to coordinate with solvers. And so it's a relatively simple architecture, but it's important to kind of making universal accounts work, and that's what is going to be consuming our token. And so the two kind of core like economic points for us is revenue through Universal X at 1% on every transaction, plus universal accounts themselves are going to be using our token in the backend. We aren't going to force our token on anybody. Nobody needs to like use our token to transact or to hold it for gas fees or anything, but it'll be constantly consumed every time universal accounts are used. And we are expecting that universal accounts are going to ideally be using a bunch of different wallets, a ton of applications across the ecosystem. And so as we scale that, the usage of our token scales, we kind of gain more revenue as a protocol. Universal X hopefully continues to grow. We gain more direct like cash revenue from that. And so that's kind of the way that we're thinking about it right now. And I think it's a pretty strong model.
Yeah, very interesting. And specifically the coordination layer part really resonates with me. So you mentioned already multiple times, you mentioned it, and now I really want to dive deeper here, which is obviously what we talked about in the previous episode, but now it's finally here, which is the application you were talking about the entire time. And I mean, Universal X has generated a lot of buzz in your ecosystem, and I've seen a lot of excitement around it, and you also made a business case for it. But it's also very particle network branded at the end of the day. So could you talk a little bit more about how you see Universal X's position in the ecosystem of particle network? This is also somewhat kind of a nice showcase that you can show developers to demonstrate what kind of applications are possible with particle network under the hood.
Yeah, kind of back in September, we had finished universal accounts in their first version. And, we ran this event in Singapore called Abstract Coffee. I think we might have, I don't know if this was before, our last episode was before that or after that, but we ran this event in Singapore where we basically rented out a coffee shop for 7 days or 5 days or something. And you walk into this coffee shop, we give you download this app, you go and you buy a coffee, and you buy that coffee with, at that point, a unified balance. We have this like this demo app where we would airdrop you $5 on mainnet, then you would go and you buy this coffee with that. Like it's like $5 spread across 5 different chains. You do one transaction, does it automatically. It was like showcasing like a chain abstracted transaction. In real life, you go and you buy coffee, you sit around, you talk for a second, you leave. It was a really cool event, and the feedback that we got from that was like people want chain abstracted apps, and we sat down and we thought, we're like, well, how do we go to market with universal accounts? So we kind of have two options. Like the first thing is that we could just launch SDKs and kind of like do a lot of developer marketing and hope that people will use it, hope that there's going to be like a nice application that builds with it, that proves it and like gets a lot of, mind share. Or we can kind of go the route that, as I mentioned, Layer 0, Farcaster, Li-Fi went. And why don't we just like build something ourselves? Like, why don't we just like build out the first application using universal accounts? Why don't we make that mind share ourselves? Why not? Like, why would we sit around and wait for somebody to build something if we could just do that ourselves first and show everybody why we think this is important? And like, it's clear that we could do that. Like from that event that we ran, like we were capable of it. And so why don't we just do this? Like, why don't we just build something out? And so that's exactly what we did. We were like, okay, we had the potential to basically be the organization that not only built out, like some of the core infrastructure for chain abstraction, but could build out the application that was the catalyst or was the light bulb moment for chain abstraction in the industry. Because the way that I see it is that people have always been skeptical of chain abstraction. And the only reason why is because they don't have any reference point for it, because it's all just theory. It's all just people talking, right? So there's no tangible backing of it. And so what we wanted to do is we're like, we could build something that could be that moment for people where it clicks and they understand it and they say, okay, I get this user experience. And I understand why this is valuable. And so like if we built our own application, we could like be that light bulb moment for people. We could showcase our infrastructure, and we could potentially build like a killer app here that we're taking advantage of the opportunity of building something chain abstracted for the first time. And so that's kind of what we started in September. We were like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to build an application. And so over the course of, between then and really December, we built out Universal X, and we decided that we're going to build a trading platform. Trading is, in my opinion, the only real PMF that crypto has at the moment, which is, for better or for worse, this is like kind of where this is what people do on chain at the moment. It's they trade and they speculate. And so we're like, that's what we're going to build. We're going to cater towards the biggest PMF in crypto. We're going to build a trading app because that's where the usage is, that's where the revenue is. And so we're going to build a chain abstracted trading app with universal accounts. And this is going to be our light bulb moment for chain abstraction. It's going to be our proof of universal accounts and might even turn into being a source of revenue for us. And so on December 3rd, we launched the first version on iOS, apps, Play Store, web, all these different platforms. And the first version was very minimalistic. It was like literally you go on there, you fund your account, just select whatever token that you want, Solana, EVM, chains, and buy it. It was a pretty cool user experience, but it was very simple. But it was proof of chain abstraction. And so that was it wasn't a light bulb moment for everybody, but it was for a lot of people like, okay, I understand it now. This is like a good user experience. And then over the course of, between then and now, I got a ton of feedback over what people wanted. And basically 24 hours ago, we launched version 2, which basically transformed the entire platform into being effectively a centralized exchange, but on-chain and non-custodial. And so it's like insane amounts of trading data, full charts, like everything you can, like, I mean, it's like a full on like Bloomberg trading interface basically, but it's completely chain abstracted. And so far, even in the first 24 hours, I've had a lot of people that have reached out and being like, hey, this makes so much sense to me. And I've been using this. And like, this is kind of like sort of the light bulb moment for me with chain abstraction. And so like, I've even had a lot of people that were previously skeptical of chain abstraction. And today I messaged them and I was like, hey, I know that you're skeptical of chain abstraction. I know that you have some strong beliefs around this, but just try this out and let me know what you think. I've sent this to 2 people so far that I know are critical of it. And both of them have responded to me and saying, yeah, I got to give it to you. Like, this is a pretty killer experience. Like, this is like, this is like, I kind of understand it now. And so we're starting to see that we've met our first goal so far with what we originally set out to do, which is that Universal X has so far been a light bulb moment for a lot of people. So like they understand chain abstraction. It's been a catalyst for some people. It's also been a fantastic proof for developers. Since we launched in December, Universal X has been our best developer marketing that we've ever had, because it's shown developers like, hey, we want to build this type of experience. How do we do this? And so we've had, over 100 products reach out to us and say, we want to replicate this. We want the SDKs for this, which has been great for our marketing, to developers. And then it's also started to be a pretty good source of revenue for us as we've scaled to, more daily volume, more users. And as we're continuing to grow every single day, it's becoming like a real consumer product that we're building out. And so far, it successfully met all 3 goals that we originally kind of started to build it for. Being a light bulb moment for the narrative, kind of attracting developers, and actually generating revenue as like a real product that stands on its own. And so that's kind of why we built it. And that's why we've been focusing a lot on it. And it's been very successful for us.
Oh, this sounds very, very wonderful. And I just wanted to touch base on one last thing before we have to approach the when mainnet launch question. But before that, You mentioned it is how it is. Product market fit for crypto at the moment is speculation. So I wanted to ask you, with regards to that, how do you basically envision, or like, what kinds of applications do you envision people will use over the course over the next 10 years? Do you see a future where crypto or like blockchain technology is all about powering financial applications? Or will we actually also see a world where we use the blockchain for other things? Or do you say, okay, let's put away these naive ideas about using a blockchain for something else than financial services?
Yeah, I think I've always subscribed to the idea that blockchain and even crypto more broadly can be applied to everything, and it is not just financialization. I think that there's some verticals that I've not always been on super on board with, like gaming and that kind of stuff. I can understand it, but I think like every major traditional vertical, I mean, blockchain is a means of decentralization. And so that's what we need for, I mean, it's not just financial. I mean, that's like, of course, the most obvious use case because, you know, blockchain creates artificial scarcity or digital scarcity, which enables financialization. But I think pretty much every major traditional vertical, consumer vertical, can be applied to blockchain. And so I think that over time, we're going to see it kind of consume or reimagine a lot of existing verticals, in Web 2. I think we're always going to have like financial aspects and speculation probably be the number one use case. I don't think that'll ever be surpassed by anything else because it's just so easy to do with crypto and with Web3 and or whatever you want to call it, blockchain, that it's just going to always dominate. But I think that over time, we're going to see a consolidation away from like that being the only product market fit and hopefully into, I think we could triple the size of the current market if we just expand past this use case and into every, other verticals that I think we can impact. I just think we haven't really found good angles for that yet. I mean, even things as simple as like, like a car title and like, RWA, like these verticals that are really interesting that are not financial, but are things to do with ownership and how do you prove ownership without relying on like a centralized, like slow government or things of this nature. I mean, there's so many things that can be applied to in terms of individual sovereignty and being able to prove ownership and track things more effectively. And there's so many use cases for it. It's just that what we found so far is that speculation is a great way to motivate people, and that's part of market fit. In the early, like, blockchain is still relatively early. I mean, it's 15 years old or something like that, or 16 years old at this point. And so, I think there's a lot of ways that we can go, but for now, I think especially over the next 5 years at least, speculation is going to continue to be like probably the only, or if not the main product market fit.
Yeah, I can very well imagine that. But yeah, speaking of the upcoming years, let's first speak about the upcoming weeks, which will be very critical for you guys at Particle Network. So can you talk a little bit about when launch and how, and some more details, whatever you find interesting?
Yeah, so there's going to be kind of like two main parts of our launch. Of course, you can already use universal accounts on mainnet through Universal X. The next thing for us is going to be launching the SDKs, which will allow anybody to build on mainnet with universal accounts. That will probably happen before ETH Denver is what I'm expecting, probably early February, mid-February. That will be like anybody can use our mainnet, anybody can use universal accounts. And the next step from that is going to be an open network that'll go alongside our TGE. That's where we're going to onboard our validators. We're going to make our chain permissionless. Anybody can run a validator. Anybody can participate as a liquidity provider. It's going to be very open and kind of like fully launched and decentralized at that point. That I wish I could give an exact date or like a specific timeline. I can't, unfortunately. With that, we are looking at like in the first half of this year. We want that to happen. As the main thing for us is like TG, like there's no blockers technically in terms of like having that happen. It's really just TGE and like timing that correctly. And so for us, we take timing TGE really seriously, and we want it to be timed really well with like the product growth of Universal X, with the ecosystem growth of universal accounts and the SDKs there, with kind of the business development that we're doing. And we want that to continue to grow really tangibly such that we can have a very successful TGE. Because I've talked to a lot of founders, if you TGE at the wrong time or if you TGE before you're ready, it doesn't matter how good your tech is, it can destroy you. And so you don't want to fall victim to that because you're too eager to DG. And so for us, we're taking it slow, and we're making sure that we make the right decision there in terms of the timeline. But we're expecting the first half of this year ideally, and then we have a lot to do between now and then. But I think hopefully even before DG, if you're watching this, you'll have the opportunity to try universal accounts, or try it right now. Go to Universal X, play around with it. It's a pretty sick experience.
Yeah, guys, you heard it first, and yeah, I mean, you said it very well. There are a lot of hiccups that can happen when you time the TGA a little bit too early. There have been a lot of these stories, unfortunately. With that being said, I wished you all of the best for your upcoming mainnet launch. I think everyone is very excited about it. As always, the first weeks of the year are always the most exciting ones. So yeah, with that being said, Ethan, thank you so much for joining us at such a busy time, I guess. And I hope I will see you on the show very soon when your blockchain is finally live.
Likewise, thank you for having me. Hopefully, 6, 7, 8 months, maybe we'll do another one, and then we'll kind of see how many of those predictions are correct and how the launch went, and it'll be interesting to reflect on that. But appreciate you having me again. It was great.
Yeah, let's do it. And yeah, looking forward to it.
I appreciate it, man.